are joined by Congressman Ryan Zinke this morning. Congressman, thank you so much for making time out of your busy schedule to join us this morning.
Great to be with you as always.
Well, I want to be the voice of local Montanans. I want to be able to allow them to ask questions through me. So we actually set up a poll and asked our audience what topics are of interest, and education was right there at the top of the list. And now with President Trump signing an executive order to begin eliminating the Federal Department of Education, I have to ask, what is your response, and should local Montanans be concerned?
Well, there's a difference between education and Department of Education. If you look at it objectively, billions and billions of dollars get sent into Washington, D.C. It gets distributed, and the distribution oftentimes doesn't provide the outcome. And so when no one's talking about removing different titles, or talking about who is best to distribute it. And when you talk to Montana, you talk to the Office of Public Instruction, they're up to the challenge, because every idea in Washington, by the time it gets out to Montana and rural, sometimes it doesn't fit. Montana, we're not a particularly diverse state as far as, race. I always diversity in Montana is height and social background. But when the formulas are set up, in Washington, D.C. or New York or some of the larger urban areas, that just doesn't translate when it comes out to Montana. We're mostly rural, we have public schools in there. So what is better fit on the funding? I think Montana can do a better job than D.C.
Well, so you mentioned there is a difference between department and education, but Montanans, they want to be able to hear, am I going to lose my job if I'm a teacher? Even libraries are concerned. Those are the things that they want to hear. Those are the questions that they want to ask you. So I guess they're looking for reassurance.
Well, remember, Montana is driven by Montanans, our education system. That's why we have a school board. That's why we have an OPI. These are federal programs in how to distribute the funds better and more efficiently. I think Montana can do it.
I know we only have a short period of time. Another topic that rose to the top is in regards to health care access. A lot of Montanans want to know, Medicaid, Medicare, are their health care needs in jeopardy?
No, the president has said over and over again, no cuts to benefits and services of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. But, we're going to look at fraud, waste, and abuse. And DOGE comes up a lot, right? And he was able to do what I wasn't able to do as a secretary or a congressman. That is look in the file and actually determine where the money is going. I stopped the grants as a secretary until I figured it out. He stopped the grants worldwide. And when he did, when he was able to look at the files, I think it's outrageous that we're spending money on transgender medical clinics in India, or condoms for Taliban, and the list goes on. So I think it's, we should all debate what we spend money on. And I love that debate. We should have that debate. But there should be no debate on fraud, waste, and abuse. And the scale of it seems to be a lot. We're exposing it. The next step is you got to confirm it. So just because someone has a Social Security number and he's listed as older than our country, or there are thousands of people that are listed there by looking at their Social Security numbers, they're older than 150 years of age, are they receiving a check? So first thing, expose the potential fraud, but you got to confirm it. And then you got to take action on it once you confirm it.
Well, you mentioned the debate. A lot of Montanans want town hall meetings to be able to have direct access to local politicians like yourself to ask those questions, but we don't see those town hall meetings. Is that going to come to an end? Are they going to have those that access?
Look, I'm on parades, I'm on radio, I'm on call-in radio a lot. But what is interesting, I was at the VA hospital. Of course, there were protesters out there. But many of the protesters were protesting there a week before, protesting the grand opening of the VA clinic. And what do the signs say? Climate change, DOGE, all these type of things. They don't know what they're protesting. But uncertainty creates some anger and angst. I'm glad to be out there, and I'm available.
Well, you mentioned the VA. So my dad, for me to understand, I have to relate. And my dad, 86 years old, actually yesterday, 20 years in the Navy, but he uses a lot of his medical through the VA hospital. And he has a concern. I've talked to Montanans here have a similar concern as my dad. What about the VA services? Is that something that's going to be gone? Because a lot of our veterans, and Montana has a lot of them, they're worried.
Well, I said on appropriations. As appropriator, we gave more money to the VA than what President Biden asked for. And this last bill we signed, they had a hole because not only did we give them more money, they outspent billions of dollars. So we covered that, but we want to know why they overspent. And I was just at the clinics, and the VA clinics across Montana do a really good job. You know, they're there, they're local, you don't have to travel to Helena all the time. So I think that Montana's VA system is improving, but no, there's not going to be any cuts to services. But how we distribute the services, I think we can get a lot better.
So you mentioned DOGE just a bit ago, so I have to ask you a question. The last time you were in studio, you mentioned that, and I'm quoting you, we have to look at the fraud, and you just mentioned a second ago, waste and abuse. And we were also quoted saying good jobs will remain, bad jobs will be eliminated, and the great jobs will excel. Now, that thousands of forestry workers have been classified as probationary, but those workers were reinstated. Now, on March 14th, you were quoted saying DOGE can set their sights on the real waste. You know, a lot of Montanans, they hear that, they're wanting to work. They don't necessarily like hearing the word bad jobs, waste, but how do you get through that and reassuring them that those, you know, they can still be employed? Because I think if you eliminate jobs, you want the economy to thrive, but if you have unemployment, everybody's wondering, if you have unemployment, how do you have that success in Montana thriving through their economy?
Well, a lot of it is, what are you doing in the job? You know, I think yesterday they disclosed they had a whole department in Washington, D.C. hanging out at K Street, which is not cheap, doing nothing, an entire department. They had a satellite system in Honolulu so they could go. They were making portraits of each other. I mean not printed portraits, but painted portraits of each other. Come on. So, and you look at Montana. You know,
but if you're saying that, though, then how do you make sure people get in the right jobs to where it actually still has economy? Because you still need Montanans to be employed.
Well, absolutely. And I always say the front line is the most important. So when you're out in the forest, you need the guys that are clearing trail. You need forest fire guys, seasonal employees. That's the front line. It's the bureaucracy that we got to look at, the front line. And on the front line, do you really need 6 biologists from different divisions? Do you need, you know, our Forest Service, do you need their biologists competing with U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologists that have different conclusions? No, we're government. So you don't need 6 layers of government employees on the same acre. So let's manage it more wisely. Let's put the positions in where they are. And just because you're remote doesn't mean you're not important. You might have a great function. And there are, you know, our super employees in the federal workforce. You know, we all know them, the Forest Service, they're super employees out there. But we also make sure that they're in the right spot to manage our forests better.
Well, I appreciate your time, but I got to ask you before you go. You went to Oregon, I went to Liberty, and they square off tonight.
And here it comes. Here it comes. I think it's the 5th seat versus 13th. But you know what? Anyone could win. I mean, you look at yesterday. There was upsets. There are going to be upsets coming. By the way, if you got
I'm rooting for my Cinderella.
Well, if you got a perfect bracket, remember you could go to Mars. I'm not sure that's a reward.
I don't know how many people had McNeese against Clemson, so a lot of brackets might be done.
Maybe down to 1.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us and answering our questions, and we appreciate everyone that took part in our poll and trying to leave comments so that we could ask the congressman. So we do appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, and God bless the great state of Montana.
Thank you, sir. And